So I don't know about you, but I love stories. Anybody who knows me or is around me, I love to tell stories. I love listening to stories. But who doesn't love a good story? Now, throughout the Bible, we see Jesus is the ultimate storyteller. I mean, he uses stories for everything, to convict people of things that were wrong, to bring about a truth that he was trying to share. I mean, stories have such a powerful piece in our lives and can be used in so many different ways. And like I said, we all love a good story. But let's think about this today. What if I were to tell you, in my hand right now is the story of your life? And in these pages are your life story, decisions that you've made, things that you've done, the good things, the bad things. Every piece of your story is written right here. How would that make you feel? And how would it make you feel if all of a sudden I opened up the story of your life and I started reading it today? Would that make you feel good that I was reading your story? Would it maybe make you feel a little anxious or nervous about what was going to be said or what was written in these chapters? Would you be proud of the story that would be read, or would you be ashamed of different chapters that you've been through and things that you lived through? I think each of us, whether we realize it or not, we're creating a story with our lives. We're creating a story that one day is going to be something we tell or others tell about us. And it's important for us to remember that no matter what comes our way, because our stories are important. God has given us this life and given us these bodies to live the stories that he wants us to live. But maybe the question today that's more important is this, is that how are you writing that story? Because we're writing these stories one decision at a time. So every decision that you make is a story that you're writing. So how would you feel about the story that you're writing today? How many of us would like to make better decisions so that we can write a better story? Maybe you don't like some of the past chapters of your life, but you can pick up right now and start writing a better future. And so with all that said, where is this going today? Well, welcome to Atlee Church today. So glad that you're with us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Trey. I'm one of the teaching pastors here. And today we are in part 3 of a series we've titled Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. And this decision is off of a book by a guy named Andy Stanley, popular pastor and author. And in this book, he helps us understand a big thought. And here's the thought around this series, is that good questions lead to good decisions. Good questions lead to good decisions. And so if we can ask the right questions before going into any big life decision, it can help us no matter what decision that may be. And here's what we talked about in the first week of the series. In case you missed it, I'll help catch you up just a little bit. If you've missed those weeks, please go back and watch some of those. But here's what we want to do with these questions that we're asking, is we want to ask them sincerely. We want to take a moment and ask these questions, not just because we have to, but because we want to. We want to live a better life. We want to have a better story. So we want to ask these questions sincerely in our life. And then we want to take a moment to pause and answer these questions honestly. To take a moment and really think about the answers to the questions that we're talking about. And then lastly, we want to act accordingly. We don't just want this to be knowledge in our heads. We want this to be actions from our lives. We want to apply what we're learning to the decisions that are right at hand in our lives so that we can live with better decisions and fewer regrets. Because you and I, we know what regret feels like, don't we? We've lived with that shame or pain for so long, and maybe you're like me, you're like, I don't want to live another year that way. I want to ask these questions in my life so that I can become a better decision maker. And if that's you today, then you're definitely in the right place. Last week, we talked about the big question as we started this kind of question asking series is, am I being honest with myself really? And this was a really deep question to start with because it attacks our motives, it attacks our heart, it attacks things that we don't like to be out there a lot. But when we ask this question, it really gets to the heart of who we are. Am I being honest with myself really? That was a question we started with last week. And this week, let's look at the second question This question will kind of help you understand where I've been going with the story thing. And here's the question we want to look at, and it's the legacy question. This is thinking about the future of our lives. What story do I want to tell? What story do I want to tell? What does my book of my life want to look like? And when we ask this question, when we make decisions, it really helps us not just think about what's right in front of us, but it also helps us think about what's ahead of us. And we, like I said earlier, here's the big thought for today. You write the story of your life one decision at a time. Every decision matters. You write your life, you write your story one decision at a time. And so when you think about the decisions in your life, think about what's led up to your story right now. Most of it has to do with the decisions that you've made up until this point. And so a lot of the times we have to really take time to think about what is the story that we want to write? And what story do we want to be told about us? When we leave one day, are we going to be embarrassed of the stories that we wrote, that we have to tell our kids and grandkids? Or will we be proud of the time that we took to slow down and ask the right questions so that it can lead to a better story that we can tell and that others can tell about us? But there's a few things that go into stories, because stories are made up of all kinds of things. And so before we kind of jump into our big story today, I want to give you a few thoughts about how to tell a better story, because a lot of us have been in decisions where we've made the wrong call because some things got in the way of the story we wanted to tell. And the first thing that usually gets in the way of a good story is that our emotions can cloud our decision making. Our emotions can cloud our decision making. Now, emotions are a good thing. God put them there for a reason. They help us navigate life very well. But a lot of times they can mislead us, and they can lead us down things that we didn't ever want to go down. They're naturally to help us, express how we're feeling and what's really going on. But the bad part is that our emotions can lead us to making decisions that are in the moment instead of thinking about the future story that we want to tell. Because think about decisions that you've made. There's never been a neutral emotional decision. A lot of big decisions came with emotions, didn't they? There was something that made you happy, and so you decided to go after it and buy it or date it or smoke it, whatever it was, and you made that decision, didn't you? Or think about, something was sad, and so you went to comfort for something. Our emotions can lead us all over the place. And that's the problem, isn't it? Is that when we look back at our bad decisions, there was usually an emotion involved that got us there. An emotionally charged decision-making environment can make it really hard for us to weigh out our options and to slow down. Because usually when we're emotionally charged, there's this focalism that takes point, is that we begin to focus on what our emotions are telling us. Instead of taking time to back up from the situation and look at the full picture and look at the story that we're telling and decide, are my emotions leading me down the right road, or am I just making this decision because of how it's making me feel? And so what we talked about last week is when we come to these moments, we have to just pause, think about the decision that we're making, and ask the question that we're talking about today. Is this a story that I want to tell? Is this decision going to be something I'm proud of sharing, or something I will be ashamed of one day? And when we take time to pause, it helps us not just focus on our emotions, it helps us see a broader picture. And so you have emotions, I have emotions, they go into every decision that we make, but let's make sure that our emotions don't cloud our decision making. And so when we are faced with asking this question and figuring out the story we want to tell, let's back up and pause for a moment and see where our emotions are really leading us. And the second thing is that when we get caught up in our stories, another thing can happen is we get caught up in the immediate and we miss out on the ultimate. We get caught up in the immediate, what's right in front of us, what we can see and experience, versus we miss out on the ultimate longevity story that we want to tell with our lives. And we get caught up in the immediate, we kind of just get what we want for the moment, but maybe it doesn't feel so good in the morning or later when we look at the chapter that we're writing. And so you and I, when we slow down, we have to think about the idea of, am I just getting what I want for the moment? Or is this going to be a story I want to tell later down the road? The ultimate, the what really matters piece. The piece that may not make us feel good in the moment, but later will lead to a story that we all desire to tell. Think about this whenever you made a last big decision. A lot of things came into play. Think about how that new car was going to make you feel in the moment, but you forgot about the years of debt that would follow that car later down the road. Or think about that person you dated and you saw those red flags. You knew it wasn't the best decision, but you kept dating them anyways, and then you married that person, and later down the road, there was a moment where you said, you know what, maybe this isn't the best decision, and maybe there was a divorce and there's so many other people affected by it, and that wasn't a story that you ever desired to tell. And so these immediate decisions, these immediate emotional gratifications don't lead to a good story. And so it is important for us, if we're thinking about the story we want to tell, to slow down long enough, allow our emotions to take a pause, and really experience what we're doing and think about the ultimate story we want to tell versus just what's in front of us, the immediate. Which brings us to our passage in the scriptures today that we're going to look at. We're going to take the next few moments. It's a longer story that we're going to kind of talk about today, and I'm going to recap some of it for you so we don't have to read the whole thing. But it's a story of a guy named Joseph. He's found in the Old Testament book of the Bible, Genesis, the first book of the Old Testament. And Joseph has a fascinating story. Listen, if anybody ever told you the Bible was boring, tell them to go read this story, because this story has every piece of a great story. And it's got drama, it's got twists, it's got turns, it's got things you just did not expect to be written in the Bible. But it's a fascinating story about a guy who had decisions made for him, but he also had some decisions to make to choose the future that God had in store for him. And this, like I said, it was written in the first book of the Bible, Genesis. It's written somewhere around 1800 BC. This guy, Joseph, is around 17 years of age when the story is taking place, and he is the 11th of 12 sons in his family. So you got to think, that's a big family, and he's going to find himself in a no-win situation very young in his age. Because of his brothers got very jealous of him because he was the favorite son. And he was the favorite son because his father Jacob had married, and his favorite wife was the one that had Joseph. And so Joseph found himself very favored, very liked, kind of put above the others, and this made his brothers very jealous. So one day his brothers decided to take matters into their own hands, and they planned to kill Joseph. Now, instead of killing him, the moment didn't go as well as planned, and so they decide to sell him off instead. They run back home to their father, and they say, Jacob, guess what happened? Here's the issue, and he was eaten by wild animals, and Joseph's no longer with us. So while his father's mourning, Joseph is being sold. And he finds himself on an auction block in Egypt, and he's bought by a military leader there named Potiphar. And Potiphar kind of takes Joseph under his wing. And you could think at this point, Joseph being a favored son, a rich son, everything he had, now his life is being turned upside down. And he's going to this place that he never would have imagined he would have gone. And this is what makes this story so relatable to you and I. Because up until this point, Joseph had not made any of these decisions for himself. These were decisions that had been made for him. And he finds himself in some unlikely circumstances. Joseph at this point had all these bad decisions. His father favored him. He couldn't have chosen or picked that. His brothers had sold him off, didn't like him. And now he finds himself in the worst of the worst, and he has to choose what to do about it. Just like you and I, we talked about this in the first week, we may not be in control of our circumstances. And bad decisions have probably been made for us and before us. But you and I still have decisions that we can make. And this is where we get to see Joseph make some really big decisions because he thinks about the story that he wants to tell. And he refuses to fall victim to his negative circumstances. What he decides to do? He decides to serve Potiphar's household well, to give it his all. Not to just be negative, but to go all out and to do everything he could. And he became very favored by Potiphar. And Potiphar ends up putting him in charge of all of his household. And things start to look better for Joseph's story. Now put yourself in this story for just a moment. Everything has just changed for you. Things are starting to look better. And then all of a sudden, he finds himself again in a no-win situation. Potiphar's wife approaches him, and she insists that Joseph become her lover. And faced with two bad options, he's around 19 or 20 years old in this moment, he has a tough decision to make. And the cool thing about this is, Joseph chose to rehearse this story out loud and make a decision. And I'm going to give you the condensed version of what happens, and then we're actually going to look at the Bible text together. But here's kind of how this situation plays out in Joseph's life. He rehearses this story out loud with Potiphar's wife. And here's kind of how the story is transposed in this moment. He says, Miss Potiphar, I came to this land with nothing. I had no rights and no future. Your husband purchased me. I did my best to serve him and you. And it continues, through hard work and God's help, I've gained the trust of your husband, and he's put me in charge of the entire household. So he's rehearsing the story. He's like, wow, I came from nothing. God was with me. Potiphar believed in me. Now I'm at this crossroads. I got to make a decision. And this is where the Bible text tells us the decision that he made. Genesis 39, 8-9 tells us this about Joseph. But he refused. And here's why. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. And then he says, how then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And so he rehearses the story out loud. He begins to weigh out his options. And what I love about this too is he even reminds Potiphar's wife of the story that she's telling as well. And here's the two stories that he comes up with in this passage. And you can begin to see which decision he made because of the story he wanted to tell. Look at this. Story number one could be written like this. Your husband gave me an opportunity I never dreamed would come my way. So I was faithful to him and the God who's been watching out for me. That was the story that he chose to want to tell. But the second story could have equally happened if he made the decision. Here's what the story number two could have looked like. Your husband gave me an opportunity I never dreamed would come my way. So I took advantage of his trust and I had an affair with his wife. Both stories, both decisions were right before him. And he had a quick moment to decide what story he wanted to tell. But as he reminds himself of this story, as he reminds Potiphar's wife, he's like, is this the story you really want to tell? I mean, your husband's given you everything. Why are you coming after me? I mean, I'm a nobody. And for me, this is not the story that I want to tell, because Potiphar has entrusted me so much, and God has brought me to this place that I never knew was possible when my brothers abandoned me. Well, like you said, Joseph did the right thing. He chose story number one, but guess what? He finds himself in a no-win situation again. And here's what happens as he makes that decision. He did the right thing, but it had bad results. And what happened was he was thrown in Pharaoh's dungeon, because this point Potiphar finds out because his wife tells him that he took advantage of Potiphar's wife. And so Joseph is now thrown in this dungeon for doing nothing wrong. And here he finds himself again in a no-win situation. And this would become a long, difficult chapter for Joseph. But you know what I've realized, and hopefully you realize this as well in your decision-making in moments in life, it's the decisions that we make in the difficult times that help determine the outcome of our story. And Joseph, he continues to make the right decisions even in the midst of his hardship and circumstances. He continues to serve well, even in the prison, and he gains the favor of the prison ward there in Pharaoh's dungeon. And he continues to serve him well. And finally, there comes a moment where Pharaoh is having these dreams, and he needs somebody to interpret them. and he calls upon Joseph because the prison ward at this time knew that Joseph had interpreted dreams and was really good at it. So he takes him up to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh begins to ask Joseph, hey, could you interpret these dreams I've been having? I can't make sense of them. And the great thing is that God had been preparing Joseph for this moment all along. And here's what Joseph says. He says, I can't, but the Hebrew God that I serve, he can. He can interpret your dreams, which was a big blow to Pharaoh because Pharaoh thought he was all mighty and powerful, and now he needs God to help him determine these dreams and these stories. But he asked Joseph to tell him what these dreams would be. And so Joseph begins to explain to Pharaoh that there was going to be a great harvest for the next 7 years. And the land would have everything that they need, all the food that they would need, and everything was going to be great. And then after that, there was going to be a famine in the land, and there was going to be no food. And so what Joseph decides to do is to really take it a step further and give Pharaoh instructions about what he should do. And this is kind of some unsolicited advice. This is not something a person who has just been thrown in prison tells a high and mighty Pharaoh. But he says this, he says, you need to make sure you wake up each day and put someone to focus on this problem. Because if you don't, people are going to starve. But you need to put somebody in charge of the grain storage. And here's what I love. This person who had been through this hard life story, everything against him, finds himself once again at a crossroads. A decision had to be made. And because he made the right decision, even in the worst of circumstances, this is where his story led. And this is where we read it, Genesis 41, 39 through 41. This is what Pharaoh responds to Joseph. It says, Pharaoh asked him, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Crazy plot twist, right? I mean, who knew the guy that they got thrown away by his brothers, who got thrown into jail for something he didn't do, all of a sudden would find himself in charge of everything. What a moment that he gets to later tell the story of. And in this moment, he gets put in charge of everything. And later we read in the story that he was right. His stories were true. The dreams he interpreted did come to pass. And so he saved the food. And you know what even happens? He saves the nation because of it. But he also saves his own families. His brothers come to him in need of food, the ones that threw him away so long ago. And he actually begins to tell them who he really was. His brothers stand before him and beg for his forgiveness because of their embarrassment. And think about all the guilt and shame they had lived with for so long. Think about the story that they wrote so long ago with the decision they made. But you know what I love about Joseph? Is he didn't let that become a part of his story of reacting to them in a negative way. He actually decided differently. He decided this way. He decided against the gravitational pull of bitterness. You got to think all the years that this has happened to Joseph. There had to be some anger, some bitterness, some things that he was just raging inside. But he chose, instead of writing that story, of writing a story of revenge, he decided to write a story of saving a nation from famine, from saving his family, and he actually saved their families. And he would go on to write an incredible story, a story that we're still listening to and sharing with today because of the decisions that he made. Now, Joseph had a lot stacked against him. Joseph could have made all the wrong decisions, but he took time. He paused. He considered the story he wanted to tell. He didn't choose the immediate, he waited for the ultimate. And because of that, he got to write an incredible story. And I would encourage you, go back in the Bible and read this whole story. It is fascinating front to back. It's in Genesis. But you know what? It leads me to thinking about today. Because let's go back to our question. What story do I want to tell? And what story do we want told about us? And for me, I was reminded of this recently. I got the opportunity to meet with a family just a few weeks ago and do my first COVID funeral. And to say that it was a weird experience was the craziest thing, because it was actually during the ice storm as well. And so all the power was out in all these places. The family is just scrambling, trying to find somewhere to do this funeral for their dad. Finally, they found a funeral home that let them in, and we're at the funeral home. And, I'd met with the family the day before, just talking through everything about this person's life. And you know what was crazy? In the midst of a random room that we're sitting in that didn't have heat and barely even had electricity to have lights on, we're all sitting around, all wearing our masks and spread out in this room, and we're just sharing stories. We're sharing stories about this man's life who had just passed. And you know what was great? As I was reading some stories, I was reminded of what a great father he was. What a great husband he was. What a great pillar in the community was. What a great man of faith that he was. And one by one, his family members just start sharing about his life, his legacy, funny stories, sad stories. But at the end, it was just an incredible opportunity for me to remember this is the way it's all going to be for all of us. All of us at the end of our lives, we're going to have a story of the time that we lived here on this earth. And I don't know about you, but I want to make sure it's a story worth telling. I want to make sure that I pass a legacy and story down to my kids and grandkids that's worth talking about. Chapters that I would be proud to share. Not chapters I'm going to regret or decisions that I'm going to wish I didn't make or should have thought about. And so when we make decisions, when decisions come our way, my prayer is that we would be more like Joseph, that we would be more like this man that I got to spend the last moments with, is that we would consider the story that we're telling, not just for now, but for our future. Because we know every decision that we make is a story that we're going to have to tell. And every decision plays a part in every chapter that we write. And so you may have chapters that you're not proud of. You may have various chapters that you wish you can erase. But the great thing is, all of us can start today deciding to write a better story with our lives. And so what a great question to ask as we go into every big decision making, because here's what we want at the end of our lives, isn't it? It's the legacy decision. It's the I'll decide a story I will be proud to tell. I'll decide, and you'll decide a story that you will be proud to tell. Which leads us back to our question that we started with today. No matter what decision you may be facing today, no matter what big life moment you have to choose, let's really consider this question. What story do you, and what story do I want to tell? Because whether we like it or not, every decision we make is a story that we're going to have to share. And will you be proud of the story that you're writing? Maybe there's some chapters you don't like, but let's choose today to write a better future for ourselves and those who follow after us. And I know this isn't an easy thing, but I know it can be done because we know good questions lead to good decisions. So ask this question as you're facing your decisions and see what God reveals to you in the midst of that. And as you do that, I just want an opportunity to pray for you today, no matter where you're at or what decision you have to make, that you really would consider this question today, and it would help you as you're making tough decisions. So let's pray together as we close out our time. Jesus, I just thank you for this church. Jesus, I thank you for your word, which is full of incredible stories for us to learn and glean from. And I just pray today, no matter who's watching or what's going on in their life, that they're reminded that, God, you want to write an incredible story with their life. God, I know for many of us, we've had bad chapters or things that we wish we wouldn't have done or we're ashamed of. But God, today, may you just renew our spirits to remind us that we can continue to write a better story for our future starting today. That we can pick up the pencil again and write the story that you designed and created for us to tell. And so, Lord, we put our hope, our faith, our trust in you. And God, we ask that you lead and guide us every step of the way. We thank you for our time together. And Lord, for anybody whose story is struggling right now or things aren't going well, I just lift them up to you. And I pray that your peace and your love and your strength will be with them no matter what they're facing today. And in your name we pray, amen. Well, thanks for being with us today, and we'll see you back here next week as we look at the next question.